It's Tuesday, March 25th. I'm Matt Harmon. Welcome to the Yahoo Fantasy Forecast, and it is a hell of a day to talk ball. And join me to do just that is Derrik Klassen. You know him, you love him from the Athletic Football Show. Derrik, what's going on, buddy?
I'm doing good, man. This is a little bit of a reunion. It feels good. This is what the offseason's all about, you know?
I would say it's a little bit of a reunion because obviously, we worked together at Reception Perception where we had you charting quarterbacks for 2 years. We miss you doing that, although Corey Kinnon's doing a really good job for us as well. And it's been great to see you thriving with the Athletic and Robert and everything going on there. I would say it's like a reunion, but I've also seen you a lot in 2025 so far.
A couple weeks ago.
Yeah, saw you at the Combine, saw you at the Super Bowl. So everybody, this is normally the time of year where you hop on podcasts with people and you're just like, man, what's going on? It's been a minute, but if again, I feel like I just saw you twice in the last couple months here.
Right, we've had plenty of time in the off season to get acquainted again. We don't have to do any of that. We can skip all that and get right into it.
Which is good because we have a lot to get to on this show today. We are kicking off one of our other draft series that we do here on an annual basis on the show. We always do Mock Draft Monday. We do our Prospect Deep Dive series with Charles McDonald. But the other one that we started doing last year was Teams That Shape the Draft. And Derrik, actually, you were on this show last year talking about the top 3 teams in a quarterback-heavy class. We're bringing you back for what this first edition is, the quarterback needy teams. And I will say, Derrik, it's a good thing, you kind of got to have the fun last year because last year's quarterback class was great. I mean, I was actually writing about this group today. We had 6 guys go in the top 12. I'm not even sure if we get 6 in the top 3 rounds this year. So, I mean, maybe I could be wrong, but just thinking about it, like I think these are the guys Charles and I talked about on last week's episode. We had Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Jackson Dart, Tyler Shuck, Jalen Milroe. Like I think those 5 guys probably go in the top 3 rounds. But other than that, I'm not sure we get a 6th in the top 3 rounds.
I would probably take the under because like you could sell me on the cases like why guys like Shuck and Milroe might go in the top 100. You could also easily sell me why they wouldn't, right? Like Milroe has had a lot of bad tape, even for exciting as some of the athletic traits are. And then Shuck, sure, you see some stuff that flashes on tape. And if you blindfolded me on his profile and told me his tape was that of a 21 or 22-year-old, I'd be like, okay. But when he's 25, 26, it's like, well, I don't know if I really want to draft that any higher than the 4th round.
Exactly. So that's why I think Shuck and Milroe might be like 4th round picks. They might be 3rd round picks. Like somebody's thirsty enough, they could go in the 2nd. I could totally see it, but I do think we'll get fewer than 6 in the first 3 rounds. So it's not exactly a great year to need a quarterback, but there are a few teams that do need quarterback quite badly. So that's what we're going to talk about here today. In the first segment, we're going to go over the obvious 3, which are the first 3 picks in the draft. In segment 2, we're going to talk about teams that definitely need a quarterback, but there's some asterisks here, and maybe they could end up doing something crazy. Maybe they could be the Jackson Dart team. You never know. And then segment 3, kind of a grab bag, teams to maybe pay attention to that I'm not quite thinking about, or teams that are looking for a high quality backup might take somebody in the 4th round or the 5th round or something like that. So let's jump into the main segment here, which is the obvious 3. These are the top 3 teams. They have, and for each one of these 3, we're going to go over 3 pressing questions that we should be considering for this team if they're going to take, and any team really that's going to take a quarterback high, like I think these 3 teams will all consider. Let's start with the Tennessee Titans. The current quarterbacks on their roster are Will Levis and Brandon Allen. We will get to the second question, which is more about fit, and we'll specifically talk about Cam Ward there. But first question we got to ask ourselves is, Derrik, Tennessee Titans, do we think this is a good situation for a young quarterback?
I don't know if it's good, but it's acceptable. And honestly, for a team that's picking 1st overall, like that honestly does clear the bar, because usually if you're picking 1st overall, theoretically your roster is pretty bad. But I think the Titans have actually done a decent job of, they'd already kind of been building the offensive line, right? Like they signed Lloyd Cushenberry last year. They drafted J.C. Latham. They'd already drafted Peter Skronsky a couple years ago. They really needed to fix the right side of the offensive line this offseason. They did that by signing Kevin Zeitler. And then they kind of overpay for Dan Moore at left tackle, but it allows J.C. Latham to move back to his more natural position at right tackle. So I don't know how good the offensive line is going to be, but I think it'll be at least passable, and that's a good baseline. You have at least one target in Calvin Ridley. Maybe people can sell themselves on Chigakonkwo again at tight end. I'm not sure I will, but at least a running back
I can promise you they will. People will do it.
I know people love the athletic tight ends. It'll be like, oh, this is the year they figure it out, and we'll be doing it 7 years from now. But then at running back, they also have Tony Pollard. So like there are enough weapons across the offense and an offensive line that should be passable that this is an environment where I don't think you're going to throw the rookie quarterback in and be like, oh my God, this guy had zero chance of making a living as a rookie.
Yeah, looking at it, actually, Chigwokonkwo from week 16, week 15 against the Bengals. He had 8 catches on 10 targets for 59 yards, 9 catches for 81 against the Colts in week 16. Then week 17, he has 7 targets, 42 yards against the Jags. And then he goes catchless in week 18, which actually that's the classic like Chigwokonkwo journey. But he did kind of finish the season on a pretty high note. So maybe he can be part of your future. And I do think Ridley, is the number one receiver here. He's kind of in this weird phase. I mean, he's had obviously a bizarre career, Derrik, but he's in this weird cycle where he was overdrafted in fantasy 2 years ago with the Jaguars. So people kind of really, I think, overstated how poor his year was in Jacksonville because of that. And then he was obviously quote unquote overpaid to come to Tennessee, even though that contract it's aging better because contracts always age better as the salary cap goes up and positions get paid more. But he was definitely overpaid for his previous season to come to Tennessee. So I think he's kind of like, that's a really nice guy for a rookie quarterback to come in here and rely on right away.
I agree. And he kind of suffers from, the Jags did this with him and the Titans have kind of done this with him, where it's like, because they are thrusting a guy who is maybe not a real number one and expecting him to be a number one, like everyone's expectations for what he should be kind of get soured. But like realistically, he's a pretty nice number two. And it's not his fault that they haven't had any other good receivers that can like help him out and bump him down the totem pole or whatever it is. So if they could, maybe find another guy in the second or third round in the draft to help him out a little bit, that would be nice. But he is like, compare this last year to, like what Drake May was dealing with. Like this is having a Calvin Ridley is significantly better than what some of these other guys were throwing to last year.
I think the Patriots were number 2 on the list of teams trying to overpay Calvin Ridley in free agency last year because they knew what type of receiving depth chart they were working with. So yeah, this is a significant gap, both from a pass catching standpoint and an offensive line standpoint, which I want to get back to in a second. But just final note on the pass catchers, I think the Titans did a better job using Ridley as kind of like a move around guy and at flanker, because obviously to start the year they had DeAndre Hopkins as their X receiver, and then they had Nick Westbrook-Akine. Had a weird stretch of catching a lot of touchdowns, but he's kind of like a sacrificial X receiver. So they worked well in tandem. Of course, he moves on. He's with the Dolphins now, but I would almost wonder if the Titans, who obviously Brian Callahan's on the staff, and Bill Callahan is too, and we're going to get back to the line in a second, but Brian Callahan on the staff, he was with the Bengals when they took Joe Burrow number 1 overall, and then they took T. Higgins at the top of the second round. I wonder if, maybe it's a Luther Burden, maybe it's Jaden Higgins, people like him out of Ohio State. I'm still trying to figure out how I feel about Higgins, but somebody else to work in tandem of Calvin Ridley. Like they have a lot of needs on this roster, but I do think pass catcher screams out to me as a team like they could go Ward at 1 and then like take that guy at the top of round 2.
Is there a receiver you like to pair with Ridley just in terms of like body style and type? Because I feel like I haven't seen as many receivers in this class yet, but it doesn't seem like there's that many like bigger outside X types that would really be like a great fit for Ridley.
Yeah, obviously Ted McMillan is the number 1 like X receiver prospect, but he's obviously not. You're not going to take him because he's going to be a round 1 selection. Trey Harris out of Ole Miss makes sense. He runs like, I'm not kidding, 3 routes. I think over 55% of the routes that I charted for him so far, I'm not done with the sample, are curl, screen, go. So, that is that's just classic Ole Miss BS, Lane Kiffin stuff. That's pretty right up the alley there, but that's the type of receiver I think would work well with Calvin Ridley. Alec Manor out of Stanford is another guy who mostly lines up at X, and he's similar with Jaden Higgins, where I go back and forth on like how I really feel about him. I'm not quite sure of those two guys which ones I prefer, but and again, Jaden Higgins is somebody as well that most people think is an X. I tend to kind of think he could be better if he kicks inside, like more as a 50-50 player, because he's so flexible. And I'm like mixed on his reps against press coverage, but those are the 3 guys. Like if we're thinking about big perimeter receivers, I think those are probably top of the list there.
Gotcha. The Harris thing is so funny. I haven't really charted any of the receivers, obviously, and I haven't charted Jackson Dart, which I won't be doing because it'll get too repetitive. But I've seen enough of the offense to know that, like, yeah, man, they're running and throwing 3 routes over there.
Again, as I said, I was very sad to see you move on from reception perception, although I was so thrilled to see you get a great opportunity with the Athletic, and we're really happy with what Corey's doing with us. But that's the other silver lining here, man, for you, is you don't have to sit here and be like, hey, Derrik, we're going to need a Jackson Dart profile on receptionperception.com here. So you are freed from that burden, buddy.
Yeah, not happening. I told the Athletic I'll do Cam Ward, I'll do Shadir Sanders. After that, contracted out to somebody else. That's not happening.
That is beautiful. I love that for you. But no, yeah. So I think just back on the offensive line too, I think we are, like, as much as we talk about the personnel, like, Bill Callahan's still a part of this. Like, I think this offensive line is probably going to go from a bottom 5 unit last year to at least maybe around the middle of the league. And again, I think our overall thought here on the answer to number one question, which is this a good situation for a young quarterback, Derrik, is yeah, it's good enough.
Right. It just has to be good enough. And, like, I think probably the best analogy for that from what we saw last year was it's not going to be as good as what Bo Nix had in Denver. That was legitimately one of the best pass blocking units in the entire NFL last year. But I think probably a closer approximation is like kind of what Michael Penix got when he stepped in for the Falcons, where it's like, it's not an elite offensive line, but they're doing, like, Jake Matthews is still a solid left tackle. You have one of the best guards in the game in Lindstrom. At the time, they had Drew Dahlman. Like, there was enough above average players here, even if 1 or 2 holes were there, that it was like, okay, we can piece together a good enough pocket for our young quarterback to feel comfortable to hang in there and make the throws down the field that he's going to need to make in this style of offense.
Okay, so let's move to question number 2, which is what type of quarterback fits best in this offense, and what do we do, again, with these surrounding players here? And I think we can be honest here. We can have like a Cam Ward conversation at this part of the proceeding because it seems like they're locked in on Cam Ward. We just reported now, actually, from Adam Schefter that the Tennessee Titans are having a additional private workout with Cam Ward. They had dinner with him. I believe it is pro day. They sent a bunch of dudes to their pro day. So again, all signs are pointing to that Cam Ward is going to be the first overall pick. It is like, there's just a small contrarian part of me that thinks it's getting a little too clear that maybe they are still trying to say, hey, like we're going to get like a trade up sort of situation here. But again, let's just live in the world where this is Cam Ward. How does he fit in what Brian Callahan wants to do, whatever that is, which I don't have a good grasp of after year 1 at his coaching regime with the Tennessee Titans, and with these surrounding players? How does he particularly fit with them?
That's kind of the tricky part, is I'm not 100% sure where Callahan wants to go, but I think I think an important distinction is a lot of times when we bucket these McVay, Shanahan guys, and like any of the play action guys together, we kind of just do it as like play action is, it's all encompassing. And I think that can be a little bit misleading. Like, I think you have the guys who want to do more of the zone boot rollout stuff, which is Shanahan. And then I think you can get into a little bit more of what McVay has become, and really what more Stefanski has been in Cleveland before all the Deshaun Watson stuff and having to change the offense for him, where you get a little bit more power, a little bit more like counter, a little bit more downhill stuff. And so that when you do play action, the quarterback isn't really rolling out. He is straight back in the pocket, 7 yards deep, and then he's just chucking these like post routes and deep corners and stuff, all of those types of routes. And that, I think, is probably more of what Callahan wants to do. What's funny is that, like, on paper, Will Levis actually is a quarterback who would be good for that, where he's willing to hang in the pocket, take those throws, and like just be a little bit hell or high water on some of these stuff. It's just that some of his awareness and some of his touch placement hasn't really allowed him to get the most out of that. Whereas I do think with a guy like Cam Ward, he has some of the good stuff from Will Levis's game where he is willing to hang in the pocket. He is willing to make some of those throws. He has the arm. But I think Ward's touch placement is better. I think he plays a little bit faster. And I think Levis will hang in the pocket and take a hit, but he's not going to like move around and buy himself space in the pocket. Cam Ward will do that. He can find like different arm angles and get to different spots and stuff like that. So I think in terms of the way that Ward wants to play naturally, where he wants to hold on to the ball and believes that the longer he has it, there's a higher chance that something good will happen. I think this offense actually does kind of fit the way that he wants to play. Yeah.
And it's funny, like Callahan was getting so frustrated, like visibly frustrated with Will Levis last year, more than you normally see from a coach. And obviously people had their feelings about that. But I think part of that was because this staff really did like Will Levis, and they love they love about 95% of what Will Levis does. The problem is that 5%, like you called it hell or high water, like you're drowning in that high water on that 5%, man. Like it is just untenable stuff. And I think that's what made it so frustrating, because there were moments, and like Nate even pointed it out on this show, where there was at least like a couple times this year where it's like Will is starting to put it together. Like he's averaging over 8 yards per attempt for like 3 straight games. And then that 4th game of the stretch would just be, again, simply unplayable stuff. So I actually like your comparison of the two guys between Ward and Levis, because Charles McDonald pointed out that Will Levis doesn't have like, Cam Ward doesn't have like object permanence. Like he will make a guy miss in the pocket, but then kind of forget that guy can still get himself back into play. But at least he makes the guy, like that's something he can learn, like more like reps, and he's had a lot of college reps, but more pro reps and things like that to, I think, be that type of playmaker in the pocket that can allow you to access some of these downfield route concepts.
Yeah, Cam Ward's problem when he has bad plays, and I've noticed this with Will Levis, it was object permanence, or like if some of the interceptions he throws, sometimes it's him just being reckless, but sometimes it's like the defense gets him. With Ward, it's not any of that to me. Like I think he actually is a good processor. I think his movement in the pocket is really good. He just has hubris, like a lot of hubris. So like you said, when he makes the guy miss in the pocket, he's like, oh, that guy's not going to chase me down. I'll make a play before that happens. And then the guy that he wants to get open doesn't get open, he gets sacked. Like those are more the type of stuff that you're getting from Ward, but that can lead to more good plays, whereas like the issues that Levis has doesn't really lead to any good plays.
Yeah, and just like on the point of how vertical this offense is, Calvin Ridley, who, I would not say is like a true deep threat receiver, he averaged almost like 15.7 air yards per target last year, which was a career high. It was more than 2 yards higher than what he did in Jacksonville in 2022. And his air yards per target in 2021 with the Falcons was like 10. So this is an offense that is trying to push the ball down the field. And I think Cam Ward can fit well with Calvin Ridley. I don't think anybody's going to be like lining up to draft Calvin Ridley in fantasy, and like rookie quarterbacks are a little bit hit or miss with like, can you actually get production out of their top receiver? But because nobody's trying to draft Ridley and nobody's really excited about this Titan situation, like I think there could be some interesting value in this offense. So I like the point about how he fits from a verticality perspective with this offense and what they want to do. Third question, which is just the bottom line here, and I think this one's obvious. The question is just, do they take one early or kick it down the road? And what should they do, Derrik?
Yeah, I think they should take Cam Ward. And I know... So my take on Cam Ward is that he's actually become underrated because the rest of the class sucks. Like we've done this thing where it's like everyone just says, oh, it's not a good quarterback class. It's not a good quarterback class. It's not a good quarterback class. And I think beyond the first guy that is absolutely true. But I think that's almost like gotten too far into our heads, and we've allowed it to seep into what we actually think of Cam Ward. And I think the other part of that too is like we're coming off an incredible quarterback class from last year. Like for as much as I like Cam Ward, he's not in the Drake May or Caleb Williams tier.
Sure.
And then even though I didn't love Jaden Daniels quite as much as a prospect, obviously his rookie season was incredible. So it would be hard for Ward to live up to those guys. But at the same time, I still think he's a considerably better prospect than guys like Michael Penix or Bo Nix or JJ McCarthy. And I just feel like we've seen a little bit too more like, oh, he would be quarterback 6 in last year's class. And I'm like, no, he wouldn't, man. He is better than those guys.
Yeah, I think people forget how much Penix going 8th. I mean, I guess people maybe have not forgotten that was a huge shock, but still, like him going as a top 10 player, and even Bo Nix, who was kind of like a fringe first round pick, like I think we're kind of retconning how good of prospects those guys were, as opposed to, and again, like JJ McCarthy, who the hell knows? We haven't even seen the guy play yet. So I agree with you. I think Cam Ward, like probably for me, if I was stacking all these guys together, I think he'd be QB4 if we're grouping last year's class and this year's class together. And like there's definitely some downside traits, but there's a lot of upside traits that I think are well worth it. And in this situation, like this run game could be really good. Tajay Spears is like a really fun number 2 back that's explosive, and Tony Pollard had a great year last year. The offensive line's better. Like I really think he could have a strong start to his career that pushes him forward going throughout.
And he could be part of your run game. He's not, it's not like if they were drafting Milroe, and it's not like Lamar Jackson or anything like that, but Ward can absolutely be part of your run game. Like he can get you, 300-400 yards a season if he needs to.
All right, let's move to the second team here, which is the Cleveland Browns, which if we haven't been doing this podcast for, 15 years, because, 15 years ago I was I was like in college or whatever. But like if we had been, we'd be doing the Browns as a QB needy team quite often. They're familiar with being in this spot. And man, like I know the situation has been dire at quarterback for Cleveland many times over the years. This is pretty tough. What's going on with Cleveland right now? The quarterbacks currently on their roster are Deshaun Watson, sort of, and Kenny Pickett. And I'd say sort of for Deshaun Watson because it feels like we've all just universally accepted that like he's never going to take a snap for this team again. And I think everybody is okay with that. Maybe except Deshaun Watson. Although, does he even want to play football anymore? Who knows? So again, it's a pretty brutal spot for Cleveland right now. And I'm curious to see where you come down on, especially the third question, what they should do. But first and foremost, question number one, is this a good situation for a young quarterback if they were dropped into Cleveland right now?
It depends on what you mean by that. Because like, so if you just look at the roster on paper and we don't consider any of the other stuff, the offensive line has probably taken a step back from where it was certainly 2 years ago. And the other problem moving forward in the next couple of years, not just as a rookie, is that a lot of these guys are free agents, so they're going to have to retool it completely. But the offensive line, I think, will be passable. And then I don't love Jerry Jeudy, but that's a good enough number one target that you can at least like almost in the Calvin Ridley bucket where it's like, okay, this is a guy. It's better than what the Patriots had last year. Like it's somebody we can funnel a bunch of targets to. So I think it at least passes like, and David Njoku's a good tight end. So you at least pass the acceptable range, both in offensive line and I think pass catchers. The problem to me is inserting a rookie quarterback where you still have Deshaun Watson in the room. You have a coach who is like, and a front office who are very obviously playing and coaching for their jobs. It's just like, it's such a volatile environment that I don't think just the roster considerations are like the biggest part of this. That's
a great point. It's just kind of all very toxic, right? Like, and I think the reason that you would take a quarterback if you're Cleveland to kind of maybe have an eye towards question number 3 is just to save your job if you're Andrew Berry and Kevin Stefanski. I don't know how often this works, but we talk about it a lot, right? Like, hey, these guys can attach themselves to a young quarterback so that if they win 5-6 games, they could be like, hey, we won 5-6 games with the rookie quarterback. And look, he was kind of trending up towards the end of the season. Look, like hypothetically, it's Shedeur Sanders. Sanders and Jerry Jeudy are developing like a little connection there. So we need to continue to stay the course on this, as opposed to if you win 5 games with Kenny Pickett and, you know, Tyler Shuck and freaking like, I don't know, Russell Wilson or whatever, like this Kirk Cousins, this weird hodgepodge quarterback room that they might have to go with. That's not that good of a sell. So I don't know, Derek, if like that works very often, but that would be, I think that's like the only reason you want to do it if you're Kevin Stefanski and Andrew Berry.
That is the perfect off-season thing because like it doesn't work very often, but the entire off-season is about peddling hope to people and to fan bases. And you can always be like, oh, well, you know, we could make it work out. We could be the team that, like, you know, like you said, second half of the season, we start to put it together. The last thing in my mind, like, when that kind of worked, and it really didn't even in this case, was Baker Mayfield's rookie year, where Freddie Kitchens takes over the second half, and then they're like, oh, this was great, we'll keep it going. And then like you realize that Freddie Kitchens being the head coach is not at all what made this thing work, and then it starts to fall apart. So even when it in theory kind of works, it really doesn't.
Yeah, more often it happens in that situation where like, oh, we got to keep this guy tied with this player or whatever, and it doesn't work, you know, because it was like a flash in the pan type situation. So yeah, and just looking at the depth chart, man, couple of concerns. You mentioned the offensive line, like, you know, they signed Tevin Jenkins, who is right now slated to be a backup interior offensive lineman, and maybe that's just what they're going to end up doing with him. But like they could end up trading Joel Patonio or Wyatt Teller or one of these guys. And then again, I think you're probably, even though Tevin's younger than those two players, he's not as good. Like, I don't think he's as good as at his best as Joel Patonio or Wyatt Teller. So maybe you're downgrading there. DeJuan Jones at left tackle is kind of like a big question mark. And in the receiver room, yeah, like I'm with you that I'm not the highest on Jerry Jeudy. I think he's much better as a 2. And Cedric Tillman had a great little stretch, and it's in the middle of the season, and nobody remembers how seasons go in the middle. They remember how it starts and how it ends. Like that, when we're viewing players, we almost always frame it through, did they get off to a slow start or did they get off to a hot finish and things like that. And he really had like a hot middle. After Amari Cooper was traded, he was promoted to the X receiver. I thought he played really well, but then he had the concussions and we never heard from him again. So I say that to say, like, that's your second receiver who might even be like a guy that you can start and be a really good X, but he's still like an unproven commodity. And my last point about the depth chart too is all the talk, Derrik, is we're getting back to Kevin Stefanski and what he wants to do, which I think is smart. I would have bet on what Kevin Stefanski wants to do instead of the Deshaun Watson experiment 10 times out of 10. The problem is that offense is built around a really good running game, and beyond the offensive line questions, who's the running back for this team right now? It's like Jerome Ford, Nick Chubb's a free agent. Nick Chubb's not who he used to be. Like, it's not even that like well set up to be a team that like, oh yeah, we establish it and make it easy on a rookie quarterback.
Yeah, they have to draft a running back with one of their next 2 picks, I would presume, because it can't be Jerome Ford. Like, Jerome Ford is the perfect number 2 back who hits like 4 explosive play, like big explosive plays, and people are like, oh, he should get more carries. But then you watch him get 20 carries in the game, and you're like, oh, he's kind of blind half the time and doesn't take contact all that well. I don't know if this is great. So they definitely need somebody who could, like, if they, I don't know, like if Omarion Hampton or something happens to fall to like 35 or whatever it is, that would be sweet for them, and that would be a pretty good bailout for what they need. And then Cedric Tillman, I'm kind of with you. I love the idea of Tillman, and he did have a stretch last year where he looked good, but you just like the confidence meter for that to be your number 2 going in when the sample size of quality play from him is so small. It just feels like I would love if Jerry Jeudy was bumped down a role and if Cedric Tillman was potentially bumped down a role, but that's just not the reality we live in with this roster.
No, it's not. They have 4 picks in the top 100. They have the 2nd overall pick. They have the 33rd overall pick, 67, and they got the 94th overall pick for Amari Cooper from the Buffalo Bills. That I liked that trade for the Bills at the time, but that is definitely a win for the Cleveland Browns based on what Cooper gave the Buffalo Bills there. So yeah, I mean, they have the resources to add to the pass catcher room, and they have resources to add to the running back room. But again, there's more problems than that on this roster. So actually, I think this is very much like maybe like a 50th percentile situation for a rookie quarterback, but I could see it being a 25th percentile situation very quickly. Or, maybe if a couple things break right, maybe like a 55th, but I don't think the ceiling is all that high here.
I don't think the ceiling's high. And again, it goes back to just like, again, the ceiling for what the roster, like the actual players are, is not that high. But then you factor in, again, the volatility from what you might get for a coach playing for his job. And they kind of have a mismatched coaching staff in terms of like the offensive minds there. All the stuff with Deshaun Watson, like it seems more likely that they would hit their floor as a situation rather than their ceiling, which is scary for any young quarterback.
Let's play pretend though for second question here, which is what type of quarterback fits best, and again in the frame of they are obviously going back to more of Stefanski's roots.
I mean, almost kind of a lot of the stuff I said with the Titans, like because I think when we've seen Stefanski really be at his best, it's when they have a very downhill running game where you get a lot of these pulling concepts where your play action stuff then becomes we're just taking these deep 7-step drops in the pocket, hitting that landmark and throwing the post routes, throwing the corners, these deep digs behind like a seam route where you run the dagger concept, all that sort of stuff. So I really do think like Cam Ward would be great for their offense, but if the Titans are taking him first overall, that's not going to happen. And so if I look at the rest of the quarterbacks in this class, like Shuck stylistically is probably the best fit, but obviously you're not taking him at 2nd overall. So
no, but he could be an option at 33 or 67, one of those options. I mean, 33 is aggressive, but I think if you took him at the 67th overall pick or maybe moved up a little bit for him, and again, he joins this hodgepodge of it's Kenny Pickett, it's probably Russ, and it's or Kirk Cousins, and then it's Tyler Shuck. I don't know. It could be worse, bro. Like it's kind of the way I feel about it. And again, in the 2nd overall pick, you're probably either taking Travis Hunter, which man, as a Travis Hunter should be a wide receiver, true believer. At least like, I think he's a great corner, and I think he should at least try to play both ways. But this is a team that views Travis Hunter as a wide receiver first. They said that at the NFL scouting combine. As a Travis Hunter true believer, like I actually don't want to see that happen. I don't really want to see him join a weird room of like Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman, and then like, all right, let's have Kenny Pickett, Russ, and Tyler Shuck all taking turns like throwing to Travis Hunter. I actually don't want to see that, but I think from like a plan perspective, it could be worse.
Yeah, and I know at the combine, a lot of people had like a lot of consternation about the Browns pretty immediately calling him a wide receiver. But yeah, dude, look at their cornerback room. And like, sure, if you drafted Hunter, you could play him over Martin Emerson because he's a better corner than Martin Emerson. But it's like they have enough good corners that they wouldn't need him to really play it, that they could just go play him at wide receiver.
Yeah, and they've struck out at wide receiver actually pretty notably in the draft. Like they drafted Anthony Schwartz and David Bell, like these guys in the third round that just gave them absolutely nothing. And like Elijah Moore is a free agent; he's not even slated to come back on this roster. So I like your way, like your description of what quarterback fits best here. Number 3, bottom line: do they take one early or do they kick it down the road? And Derrik, what should they do if you're making the decisions for Cleveland? What should they do here?
I would not take one at 2. I think if you want to entertain the idea of taking one again at 33, which actually is probably still aggressive for a lot of what are the options are going to be, but maybe at 67, or if they trade up back a little bit into like the 50s, you could take a Shuck or whoever it is, something like that. That could make sense to me. And then I still think even with that being the case, probably try to see if you can get your hands on Russ for like a low amount of money. I doubt Kirk is on the table for them just money-wise. But I would still probably want to honestly just throw as many bodies at the problem and just let them kind of Hunger Games each other in training camp and just see who comes out on top.
That's kind of how I feel about it too, man. I mean, I get the idea of like you're trying to save your job, and that may well end up being why Shedeur Sanders ends up being the second overall pick here. Although if I was forced to like make a guess, I think that they are going to go this weird quarterback committee route. And I think that they've put out like some, we want to see Sanders second overall pick. Like it's possible. I think they're trying to get the Giants to jump up one spot and like scam a couple of extra draft picks out of them. So let's get to the Giants here because they're the third and final team we're going to talk about in segment 1. Current quarterbacks on their roster are Jameis Winston and Tommy DeVito. Jameis Winston signs with the Giants over the weekend after Aaron Rodgers visited with the Steelers for 6 hours and came away without a deal. But I think that we're going to talk about the Steelers, spoiler alert, in the next segment. I think that says to me that we're probably getting Rodgers with the Steelers, and so the Giants are just taking the next best quarterback off the free agent market that like you can put together a competent passing game with. I obviously, and the tweet has gone a little berserk about this. I tweeted like back when the Giants beat the Colts in week 17 that Malik Neighbors was dominating the Colts just so that the team they couldn't draft a rookie high and they would sign Jameis Winston and he would go for 2,000 yards with Jameis Winston kind of as a joke. And that actually happened. That's
incredible.
Here's the thing though, Derrik, they gave Jameis Winston $8 million over 2 years. And in the hilarity of that tweet and the idea and how funny that would be and just the fact that like, Jameis Winston, if he got 17 games, should just hyper target. Like we just saw the pump and dump Jameis Winston scheme with freaking Jerry Jeudy. This is a way better player than Malik Neighbors. He probably could go for 2,000 yards. The thing is though, they'd probably go 3-14 and they'd be a bad team. And because he only got that little amount of money, he's not gonna make it 17 games. Like they're not counting on Jameis Winston to start 17 games. They could still sign like Russ, or they could still draft a quarterback high. So, but at least of the 3 teams we've listed off here, I think they have the most viable. Like if everything goes wrong, we could at least start Jameis Winston and get away with it.
Right, they have the best plan B. Whereas like the Titans, they're not starting Will Levis again. That's not happening. And then the Browns, I don't think they want to start Kenny Pickett, and they probably shouldn't. And even if it is like they go and sign Russ, I don't think they want to do that either necessarily, even if they might have to. Whereas Winston, again, you can sell yourself on why this might work out if you can get the best play from him, which again, everybody has been doing that for 8 years, but he is talented enough that you're going to convince yourself that you can be the one to do it. And then again, he probably was the best veteran quarterback on the market. Like I would at least rather swing for the upside of a guy like Winston than a Russell Wilson. Like I know what Russ is at this point, and unless you have the perfect conditions, you're just not going to get what you want out of it.
Okay, so with that kind of set here, let's talk about this situation as a whole. Number one question, of course, is this a good situation for a young quarterback if you're just looking at the Giants right now?
So pass catcher, yes. Like Malik Neighbors is awesome. He already looks like a bona fide number 1 receiver who can just generate a touchdown for you if you need to. Mm-hmm. I think Darius Slayton is like a great auxiliary player to have alongside of him. And then I kind of like what Theo Johnson might be at tight end. I think he still has some problems. It might take a year or two for him to really come online, but I think as a young tight end prospect, he has something to him. The offensive line, however, is degrees worse than either of the two teams that we've just talked about in the Titans and the Browns. Like I'm looking at the Giants, their Our Lives page, and this is probably going to be a bottom 5 offensive line again to me. Like Andrew Thomas is a great left tackle, but he is coming off of a year where he battled some injuries, and then I don't know if they have even an average starter at any of the other spots. And so this to me is an offensive line. Like maybe you can sell yourself that John Michael Schmitz at center can take another step as a young player, but this to me is a spot where offensive line to me is more important for quarterbacks surrounding environment and stuff than pass catchers. And this is the worst offensive line that I think any rookie is going to get thrown into this year.
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to overstate how critical I don't want to understate how critical having a guy like Neighbors is to any quarterback, because, and I said this when he was drafted by the Giants, he was uniquely talented and uniquely skilled to survive a bad landing spot. And that was a bad landing spot. Like of all of the teams, all of where he could have gone in the top 10, it's like, you don't want him going to the damn Giants with Daniel Jones, but he still had a dynamic season with those guys because, as you said, like he can do way more than this, but you can have him run some bull Mickey Mouse routes and he'll get you like 7-8 yards and maybe 60 yards and a touchdown on a pretty consistent and like set your watch by it basis. So that really helps for a young quarterback, but it's not everything. And beyond like the offensive line, which I agree with you is a question mark, where are you at with like Brian Daboll as a play caller and offensive designer? Because I have definitely gone back and forth like on an annual basis.
I think the thing with Daboll, and I think Daboll, when he's been at his best as a play caller, whether it was in Buffalo or even going back like a longer time than that, back to Alabama, it was when he had a quarterback who was clearly mobile, which obviously Daniel Jones was, and he got some of that out in 2022 or whatever it was. But also he likes being in a little bit more spread stuff, a little bit more RPO, a little bit more of that semblance of offense. And I think when he's had to accommodate the offensive line not being able to handle that sort of stuff and not have a consistent run game, he's really struggled. And again, that's not going to be fixed this year because the offensive line is going to be terrible. So if they try to be in all this spread stuff where they're in a little bit more pure pass and like you're not having, these 7-8 man play action protections, you're going to get the quarterback killed. And I wonder how he's going to be able to bridge that gap.
Yeah, that's a great way of saying like some of the issues. And I just think like they designed a really good offense to get functional play out of Daniel Jones in year one, but then they tied themselves to Daniel Jones going forward. And then it was like, well, they couldn't expand beyond that, but it's like, well, we can't expand beyond that because of the quarterback. Well, you guys tied yourself to that quarterback. So like, I don't want to hear that as an excuse. I've just like become less and less impressed with the Brian Daboll regime in New York. Even at the end of last year, as he's saying, like when Drew Lock gives that game against the Colts, when Drew Lock goes crazy on the Colts, Malik Neighbors goes crazy on the Colts. I think Daboll said something to the effect afterwards, like, see, that's what happens when you can get really good quarterback play. It's like, dude, who's making decisions here? Like, what are we talking about?
That's the only time Drew Lock has ever done that. Like,
yeah, it's never happened.
What are we talking about?
He had that one game against the Eagles where him and Geno Smith were like doing the
that's true.
Yeah, there was that. But
and even that game was more like a nice moment rather than like a really good game.
That was like 20% of a game was pretty cool for Drew Lock. That legitimately that Colts game, which I think still says more about the Colts than it does about Drew Lock or anybody else. That was like a great game, just wire to wire, great game from Drew Lock. But again, that's what the Giants are hoping to get out of their quarterback position. But like, as we're talking about Brian Daboll and again, all this stuff, like what type of quarterback fits this offense best? And I want to get your thoughts here on Shedeur Sanders, who Schefter said today, actually, that Colorado quarterback Shedeur Sanders has been and continues to be linked to the Giants no matter what quarterbacks New York adds to its roster. Obviously, that is focusing on the Winston edition over the weekend.
So when I kind of think of some of the best quarterbacks that have been in Daboll's offense, you had the one Daniel Jones year where he was able to get something out of it. You had Josh Allen kind of taking obviously Josh Allen is Josh Allen and he's a superhero. Sure. But when Daboll was there, when he started to facilitate, going from a pretty incomplete player to being a good one, Daboll was kind of there to foster that. And then he was with Jalen Hurts at some point during Alabama. I think it was Hurts' last full year as a starter. So we've seen these guys who are really mobile players, who can get outside of the pocket and kind of either scramble or be part of the designed run game, and guys who I think are pretty comfortable with the RPO element. Like Hurts absolutely was, Josh Allen absolutely was earlier in his career. Daniel Jones a little bit less so. They had to do a little bit more of like the rollout stuff with him, but still part of the mobility element. So when I'm looking at players in this class, I don't really see a lot of that in Shedeur Sanders. Like he is more of a like true drop back quick game passer, which there is certainly some of that in this offense with as much spread stuff as they do, but I don't really read him as like an RPO player or really somebody who adds anything to your run game. I think when you look at this class, you're looking more at like the Jalen Milrose, maybe the Riley Leonards, like those type of athletes to really facilitate this type of offense.
Yeah, I go back and forth on the Sanders fit specifically here because I do think if you are trying to just be more of like a traditional quick game offense, as you mentioned, like him and Neighbors, I think actually would be a really interesting fit together. Like, and I think he could, if we're trying to get the ball out quick behind a bad offensive line, I think he would be better at that. Now he has some like quirkiness with his decision making, and maybe quirkiness is putting it kindly, but he's got some like quirkiness with his decision making, and he makes some curious kind of choices under pressure that end up resulting in sacks. But and again, that could be toxic behind this offensive line, like sack eater, bad offensive line. That's where like I'm not sure if this fit makes a ton of sense. For it really comes down to, and we did this, and I think I was guilty of it, and a lot of people were guilty of it last year when talking about the Bears and Caleb Williams, where look at all these options that he has when he drops back to throw the football. It's like, well, he's also kind of a guy that I think he plays well in structure, but he needs to be incentivized. You said this a lot last year. Like he was not incentivized in Lincoln Riley's offense to play in structure because the structure of the offense sucked. Well, guess what? He was in an offense last year where the structure of the offense sucked and they couldn't really protect him up the middle, like from an interior perspective. So like all of those cool pass catching players were already kind of neutered because the pass game design and concept sucked anyways, but it was even worse with that marriage and like Sanders in this offense. That's a little bit on my radar too.
And the other thing is, I think with Sanders, some people have done, and rightly so, in saying that the Colorado offensive line was bad, and if you get him out of that situation, maybe he'll take fewer sacks and he won't be as inclined to do all the playmaking stuff. Okay, but if he's in New York, where they're a bad team, and he has to do some of that stuff, and it's a bad offensive line, then you're just going to get the same exact tendencies that we saw from him in college. Kind of like you said with Caleb and the Bears, like the offensive line was bad and the structure wasn't good, which is a lot of what he dealt with at USC. And then lo and behold, you get a lot of his bad plays that he had at USC.
Yeah, like this isn't revelatory analysis, but I really feel like Sanders is going to be retroactively analyzed very aggressively. Like if he ends up being very, very good, I think people will be like, see, you guys overthought this, whatever. And if he's really bad, I think people are going to dunk on him pretty hard because of just who he is and who his dad is and kind of the whole mystique of the Shedeur Sanders stuff. But I really feel like it's going to come down to what team he lands on. And New York, I think, like I don't have a strong take. I can kind of see it both ways, to the point that if it goes down the positive or negative road, you could kind of sell me both stories here. But the offensive line is definitely making me the most concerned, more so than I'm like enthusiastic about the pass catchers that he's working with here.
This would be a spot where, and maybe them having Jameis Winston is actually good for this, if they could just sit him for as long as possible, because then maybe next offseason you can fix the offensive line. But also, too, I think because Sanders he's just not very talented. Like, he's not a great athlete and his arm is kind of not great. He's probably going to need to be a guy who really like is locked in on what the system is asking of him, and he can really speed up his processing speed. When you're walking in week one behind a bad offensive line, it's kind of hard to play that way. But if he can get 10 weeks on the bench where he can actually start to, soak in some of this stuff a little bit better, I think that would probably help a player like particularly like him.
I like that. The only problem is I think it's going to maybe take 2-3 weeks before Deion Sanders is talking about Jameis Winston in his Colorado press conferences. Like
especially on a New York team, like that type of media sphere. Like,
week one's going to be awesome. Always is with the Jameis Winston experience. The first couple weeks are pretty cool. By week 3, week 4, Deion Sanders is like, are we serious? Coach Prime's, are we serious with this Jameis Winston thing? Like, my son needs to be playing. So that could, again, get pretty toxic pretty quick. So before we toss to our first break, bottom line, do you think the Giants are going to take one early, and should they take one early?
I think they will, because I think even though the Browns are also desperate, I think there's so many other conditions that might make drafting a rookie quarterback weird for them. I think the Giants are both desperate and will convince themselves that taking a rookie quarterback will save them. So I think they will. I don't think that they should. Like, I just don't think any of the other quarterbacks that you could take at 3 after Cam Ward are worth taking that high. I think it's a very, very scary proposition. So I wouldn't do it, but I think they absolutely will.
I think they will if Sanders doesn't go second. And I do, like, again, my spidey senses are tingling about them like trading up one spot with the Browns, and just for all the talk about this is bad quarterback class, we're going to get quarterbacks 1 and 2 just like we always do, somehow, some way. And while I agree with you as like in like a neutral situation, all things considered, they probably shouldn't take one. I just think Giants fans are going to outright revolt if they walk into the season with like a Jameis Winston and Russ quarterback tandem, and like somehow Tommy DeVito is starting a game on Thanksgiving again.
So I agree with that, but if you're a Giants fan, wouldn't you rather let the Dable experience and the regime just die this year, and then next year you can go in and completely refresh, rather than like, okay, we get Sanders, but then maybe Dable still gets fired anyway, and now we're kind of hooked to Sanders, but I don't know what the next coaching staff is going to think of him. Like, it seems like it could get a little bit messier, whereas like this year has the potential for a clean break.
Yeah, probably. Like, if you can just unplug from football for half a year when, I don't know, Mike Kafka's your interim head coach or Shane Bowen's your interim head coach. Who's your special teams coach? I don't even know. That guy's your interim head coach, and Tommy DeVito's going to legitimately start somehow 5-6 games again. Like, if you can unplug from, that's probably the best thing to happen here. I don't even know why these guys, honestly, I don't even know why these guys are back for another year. I would have just pulled the plug last year and like roll this offseason and let it go. But I don't know, maybe as a receiver guy, I just want something good for Malik Neighbors, and I don't want him to go down the, Terry McLaurin path, for too much longer. But again, I'm not sure if any of these guys are really the savior that we need here. All right, let's take our first break here. We'll get to some teams on the other side that could do something weird in a weird class right after this. All right, we're back. Let's talk through 2 teams that I think do need a quarterback, especially one a little more dire than the other. That's the Pittsburgh Steelers. Quarterbacks currently on the roster, Mason Rudolph and Skylar Thompson. Like I said, let's be real. They should belong with the obvious teams in the top 3 based on the current depth chart. But somehow it's March 25th and we're still in like a weird Aaron Rodgers induced holding pattern. But again, it just makes them kind of a weird team to talk about here, Derrik. But just in case this Rodgers thing falls apart, let's discuss the Steelers as an ecosystem for a young quarterback.
I think it's fine. Honest, I think actually in a lot of ways it's better than a lot of these other teams, because I think I actually still think like it's on the table that George Pickens might get traded with the whole DK Metcalf thing, but you at least have DK Metcalf. Pat Freiermuth is a pretty solid receiving tight end. And then the offensive line I know wasn't great last year, but it's a lot of young pieces, and some of those guys just didn't even get to play. Like Troy Fautanu didn't even really get to play last year. So you could sell me that a lot of these guys could really come together in a way that is pretty impressive next year. So I like a lot of the foundation there. And then I think just having Tomlin as kind of a, get into the league, kind of like help you get your feet under you, I think all that is good. So in a lot of ways, I think it's a pretty solid floor spot. I don't know what the ceiling's going to be until we see what exactly the offensive line and run game looks like, but I think it's a pretty solid spot to be in if you're a rookie quarterback. It's the same reason that among all these quarterback needy spots, it's the one that Rodgers is probably entertaining the most, because among these teams, it's probably the best situation you can land in right now.
I think it's like significantly the best situation to land in. And I'm with you that I said George Pickens was going to get traded even before the DK Metcalf edition, because I just think they're tired of him. And I think
you think Tomlin's over it.
Oh yeah. I think that ownership is probably like, we're not giving that guy a second contract. Like, and so I think as a team, you might think like this is the moment to strike. It's not a great receiver class. It's not, again, we just talked about the guys that might be X receivers early on here on day 2. And it's a lot of guys. Like, I think you gotta overlook 1 or 2 significant problems in the profile on, like, again, Trey Harris, interesting player. He runs 3 routes. George Pickens is definitely an interesting player, but he's really good. Like you could sell me like, all right, we trade a third round pick or a fourth round pick. And I mean, it might not work out for you, but at least there's like a proof of concept that this guy is a starting level X receiver with still upside to mine there. I just think Pittsburgh probably is not his long-term destination. So this might be a time when, like, even if Rodgers is your quarterback, are you really maximizing two receivers in this offense? Probably not. And again, I think he's not coming back in 26 and beyond. So that's why I kind of thought even before the Metcalf thing, it made sense to trade him. It like made sense that might happen. Whether it's a good move or not is a whole separate discussion, but I think it probably is going to happen. But even if it's just Metcalf and you've got an offensive line here, you add Rodgers, Freiermuth's like a good player, I think. And if you can take a running back somewhere in this draft class, like then I think this offense is set up to cook, man. I think it really, you tell me if I'm right about this. I'm not like the biggest Najee Harris defender in the world or anything. I think he's like he's an eye running back. But I also think that he was a terrible fit for what Arthur Smith wants to do. I think most people look at Najee Harris and they're like, oh yeah, it's a big ass back, just like Derrick Henry's a big ass back. That's going to fit what Arthur Smith wants to do. But those two guys are not the same player. Like beyond the fact that Derrick Henry's like 4 or 5 tiers better than Najee Harris, he also hits those like outside zone lanes, and makes like that's key. And that's not the Najee Harris game at all.
That's the difference. I think Harris is a little bit better on stuff, not better than Henry, but better for his game on some of the, like, if you can run more like power counter, like kind of just, hey man, this is the gap we're running to, go get it, like go do what you need to do. Whereas the part of the beauty with Henry, and I think people misunderstand this about him, they think he's just a bruiser. His vision and the way that he can pace himself behind the line of scrimmage on those outside zone carries and stuff like that, he is a 240-pound, like, scat back explosive player. Like, that is what Derrick Henry is. There's nobody else like that. And so even though Harris body type wise kind of looks like Henry, he's really not the same style of player. And I will say, even though I do agree that Harris, in a lot of ways, stylistically was maybe not the best fit for Arthur Smith, the thing I will say that did make him decent for them is that, like, Harris never misses games, and which I think is actually a pretty valuable thing as a running back. Like, you just know what you're getting every single game. And he's a guy who, like, body type wise can take 20 carries, whereas I know people love Jaylen Warren. That is not a guy I want to give like 350 touches to over the course of the season. I just don't think he would handle it well. So Harris had some value for that offense, but it would be good now if they could go beat the Omer and Hampton team or whoever it is.
Yeah, they obviously don't have a second round pick because they traded that for DK Metcalf, but they have a third round pick, they have a fourth round pick, and if they trade Pickens, I would guess that they get like a third or fourth in that deal. So maybe they could get, again, it's probably somebody not in the Hampton tier, but maybe, I don't know. We're doing our running back preview later this week, part 1 with Charles McDonald, so we'll kind of theorize that. But like somebody that can handle like an outside zone scheme and rip off some of those more explosive perimeter runs that Smith wants
Caleb
to get
Johnson,
done.
Maybe the Iowa kid, like, could actually be a pretty good fit.
Yeah, and he's a bigger back too. So again, you're like somebody that can take the grinder carries, and then Jaylen Warren's really good. Like I think Jaylen Warren can be I think he is an awesome player for them, and they obviously committed to him from a restricted free agent standpoint. Like that could be a really nice tandem there, Caleb Johnson and then and Jaylen Warren, to the point that, like, all right, we've got Aaron Rodgers, we've got those two backs in the backfield, and like we're throwing DK Metcalf big in breaking Arthur Smith X receiver routes off play action. Like, I mean, they're probably going to win 10 games and lose in the first round of the playoffs again anyways, like, because that's just what happens. But I can sell myself on that offense more than I can some of the Steelers' offenses the last 4 or 5 years.
You can at least see the vision. Like, a couple of dominoes really need to fall in the exact right way, but you can actually see the vision. Whereas, like you said, I don't know the last time I've really seen a good vision for the Pittsburgh Steelers offense.
Is there any like rookie here that you think makes sense if they, again, if like just hypothetically the Rodgers thing falls apart, like are they a team that could take Jackson Dart in the late first round, or is that just like asking for trouble?
I think it's asking for trouble because I don't think he's that good, but my comp for Dart is actually something akin to like Jimmy Garoppolo, where I think if you can just get him to be a bot and like throw the glance routes over the middle, throw the dig like right at the top of your drop. And obviously at Ole Miss, it's been a little bit more of the RPO stuff rather than under center. But people have to remember with Jimmy Garoppolo at Eastern Illinois, it was a Dino Babers like spread RPO offense.
Oh, that's true.
And so like if you can just get him into this Shanahan, Arthur Smith style of offense and just tell him like, hey man, get through the under center drop back, hit the last foot on the drop, throw to DK Metcalf on the 12-yard drift route, whatever it is. Like, if you can maybe get him to do that, I don't know if it'll be good offense, but you could sell me on why it would work with a good run game. But even that, I don't know if I would do that until like the third round.
Let's talk about the Saints here, which is the other team I think makes sense to do something. They have a lot of quarterbacks actually on their roster. They have 4 guys. They have Derek Carr, Spencer Rattler, Jake Haener, and Ben DiNucci is on this roster. James Madison's finest. Like, Derek Carr's back for another year, but no one thinks that's a long-term marriage. Adam West of the Saints Block Party podcast actually reported that Derek Carr wants to be traded. Not that he will be traded, not that they want to trade him, but he wants to be traded, which I think makes sense because, I mean, if you're Derek Carr, you know this team, like, the fan base hates you. The team's probably going nowhere. I think if I was Derek Carr, I'd want to get out of there too. But he's probably going to be the quarterback this year, even if the head coach doesn't want it. The only person who wants it is probably Mickey Loomis. So that is why it's going to happen. But like, New Orleans, should they think about a quarterback swing this offseason, or is this more of like, let's figure that out next year?
So if they did, I wouldn't blame them, just because, like what you said, I think anytime you have a starting quarterback who is probably not going to be on the roster for you 2 years from now, I think you are always justified to take a chance at quarterback. The thing I would say on the flip side is I think Spencer Rattler was just a better prospect than any of the guys that they could take. And I think you saw, even though obviously he had some bad plays last year, I think you saw certain flashes from Rattler that were like, okay, I don't know if this is going to be a good starting quarterback, but if they get halfway through this season and the Saints have won 3 games, like, it might be worth, playing Rattler for the last 7 and just seeing what you get. And so for me, again, I think they would be justified if they wanted to do it. But in terms of my grades on these players, I don't think I rank any of them more highly than I did Rattler.
And I know that might sound crazy to people listening to this, but one, it's not that good of a class. That's worth remembering. And I know Rattler was a 5th round pick and he had some really ugly moments last year. But let's also remember, like, the Saints, by the time Rattler was playing, had no players. I mean, no players. And there's a risk that this year that their receiver room is still a huge health risk. Obviously, Chris Olave, from a concussion standpoint, they brought back Brandon Cooks, who was Chris Olave before Chris Olave, in terms of like, were concussions going to ruin his career? And now somehow he's back to the team where it all started in New Orleans. Rashid Shaheed's coming off a major injury. So I don't want to just yada that, this year they'll be perfectly healthy. But they also had a lot of offensive line injuries. And it looks like, at least on paper, I think this offensive line punched above its weight last year. And I think I think it's a better unit than we probably thought going into it. Hufanga gave them much better play at left tackle than I probably expected. So, like, Rattler in this situation, and with a coaching staff that's got a lot of leash now. Like, last year, Dennis Allen's like trying to save his job. He's just pulling Jake Haener for Spencer Rattler. Like, I think that might make a little bit more sense than maybe it sounds at kind of like first thought.
That's a good point with the coaching staff. Like, there's a little bit, maybe less tension now that, like, Kellen Moore kind of just gets to step in and be like, okay, probably not expected to win many games this year, but, like, let's see what I want this whole thing to be. And, like, I think there's actually a chance that he likes what Rattler is, or is at least familiar with Rattler's play style, in the sense of, like, there's a lot of Dak Prescott to his game. Obviously, Dak is a considerably better player, but in terms of the throws that Rattler is willing to make, we're like, yeah, man, he'll just throw the seam route in there, or like, he's very willing to throw a dig, or just some of the throws that he's willing to make into tight coverage. I think he might see a little bit of Dak in there, whereas like that, Derek Carr just doesn't do a lot of that stuff. So, and I don't know who he would draft this year that fits a lot of the stuff that he likes to do. So I don't know. Again, it's kind of a weird quarterback situation. They're probably the trickiest quarterback situation to figure out what I actually think that they should or will do.
Oh, dude, I think they're the weirdest team in the league. Like, they're the weirdest team in the league right now, because everything about this offseason seemed like, hey, great time to reset. And they just kind of ran back the whole team and brought back a receiver that they took in the first round before I even worked at NFL Network. Like, what are we talking about here? Like, that's how long ago that was. Like, this was forever ago. So, like, they're weirdly just running back what was a terrible team last year, because I think Mickey Loomis doesn't want to admit it's a terrible team. I will say, just one point before we move on from the Saints, I think that of all the teams we've talked about so far, and again, you tell me if you disagree with me, I think this actually might be like the best theoretical fit for Shedeur Sanders. And what I mean by that is, like, Kellen Moore, you mentioned like there's a lot of Dak Prescott to Spencer Rattler's game. I think if Sanders hits, he's probably like a Dak Prescott type, especially later career Dak, where he's not as much of an athlete or he doesn't want to run as much. Like the mobility is not really part of his game like it was early on in his career, but like accurate. We're running just like a professional offense. We're running a lot of quick game stuff. I think that's where Sanders can be really good. And I think about those like big in-breaking routes from, the guys that they would run from the slot, like Keenan Allen or CeeDee Lamb, obviously in this offense with Kellen Moore previously. Even like Devontae Smith ran some of those routes for them last year. Like, man, some of the best plays I thought Sanders made was when Travis Hunter is just running like a big dig route across the middle of the field and he pins that thing on him, and Hunter never gets tackled by the first player because Hunter just never gets tackled by the first player. So like, I think theoretically I could see him in this offense. So if they wanted to the Saints making an aggressive move, tell me where you've heard this before. Maybe it's an ill-advised aggressive move. They wanted to make an aggressive move up the draft board if he gets out of the top 3 picks. I actually think this is the spot where I could see him, like from a schematic standpoint, working out the best.
I actually agree with that. I hadn't thought about that until this point because I guess I just never considered that Sanders could be a Saint. But if there's a chance that he falls and they want to make the move, I actually do think it makes a lot of sense. Like, Sanders to me is probably a less ambitious passer than Dak Prescott. Granted, the bar with Dak is very high because he's kind of insane sometimes. But in terms of like a lot of the quick game stuff that they do, I mean, Kellen Moore's offense, he's a West Coast guy. Like the foundation of his stuff is like he wants to run a lot of stick, all of these like, slant flat concepts, a lot of these like standard spread quick game concepts. And you're betting that the quarterback in 10 or 11 personnel is going to be able to just see the defense and be like, all right, I know exactly where the ball needs to be. 1, 2, 3, balls out. And so that probably is a really good fit for Shedeur Sanders, especially if maybe you can convince yourself the offensive line will take a step. Like maybe Fuaga plays a little bit better. Maybe the run game looks good. So by virtue, they're just in better down and distances to pass protect. Like I actually could see why this would be a decent situation for Shedeur Sanders in year 1.
Yeah, then maybe you can grant Derek Carr's trade to the Giants or whatever, one of these teams, the Browns or something, I don't know, later on in the draft if that happens. But yeah, I could see it working out. And I say this as somebody that like, God, I just want good things for Chris Olave, both from a health perspective. And this is a player that of all the players I've charted in reception perception. So again, this is dating back to like 2014 when I first started collecting league-wide data. His rookie season is still the lowest slant route rate that I've ever charted, 7.4%. And like, we're about to jack that thing up in the Kellen Moore offense. That slant rate is going to jack up for sure. I'd just like to see like a quarterback who can consistently hit those. That's not Carr's strength. He's more of a check it down to the running back if we're doing quick games. So that's the only reason I think the Sanders thing could work out. And that's a big reason I want to see it. But let's take our last break. When we come back on the other side, we're going to talk about some teams that maybe could be looking for like a backup or somebody to pay attention to right after this. All right, we're back. Final segment here. We're going to just talk through some teams that we should just have like kind of on the periphery that could make a quarterback move. Either they're someone we might overlook or maybe they're looking for a backup quarterback. Before we talk through the backup quarterback crew, Derrik, what do we think? Like, are there any teams like from my list of 5 here that maybe I overlooked?
Seattle, I think, is one to me that, and I wouldn't have said this initially when they signed Sam Darnold, but then the contract details came out for Sam Darnold, and it's like pretty much a 1-year deal. Like it is in theory a 3-year deal, but after year 1, they can get out of it with, I think, 0 or effectively 0 dead cap. So it's pretty much a 1-year trial run for Sam Darnold. And if it works out, great, we've got our quarterback for the future. And if it doesn't, okay, then we move on. And so they are a team that I could totally see them taking a, 3rd round, whatever on Jalen Milroe or Tyler Shuck or whoever it would be, whoever they want it to be. And what's funny is like, that is exactly how they landed on Russell Wilson, right? Like they did the Matt Flynn deal and they signed him and it was like, oh, we'll see if it works out. Well, yada, yada. And we draft this other guy and it's like, oh, wait, that guy's better. We're just going to start him. And so the chances that they get a Russell Wilson in this class are obviously incredibly low, but I would not be surprised if they followed that blueprint again.
I was just thinking Jalen Milroe plays Russell Wilson, Sam Darnold plays Matt Flynn. That's like probably a quarterback from the NFC North, a guy that's got arm talent and maybe has some quirks to his game in Jalen Milroe. Like maybe it's a little too on the nose here if we're casting these guys, but it's at least worth considering. I'm sure Seahawks fans will be up in arms like, why didn't we get another guard or whatever if we take Jalen Milroe in the third round. But it does make sense, and it seems like this. I don't know, Derrik. The Darnold thing, I get that it's a 1-year deal, but they're basically like moving heaven and earth to kind of build the Kubiak offense, and part of that is, well, Darnold's great in this like Shanahan offense. It just I don't know. The Seahawks are kind of messing with my brain right now, because it feels like, yes, the smart thing to do would be to view Darnold as a bridge, and we're trying to move a young guy along, but we're also like selling out to build a hyper specific type of offense that works for Sam Darnold. I don't really get it, but I could nevertheless see them taking a quarterback somewhere in the draft.
I've hated their offseason. I really don't like it. Like I think they, because of what they got back for DK and because of what they got back for Geno, it's like, okay, you have more picks. The Darnold only being a 1-year deal, it's like, okay, you have off ramps. So in that sense, it's not that bad. But like you said, I don't know why they moved heaven and earth, and like everyone is selling like, oh, well, in the Kubiak offense, the offensive line and run game can be better, and like if the run game's better, they can pass protect better and all this stuff. And it's like, I kind of get all that. But one, it's not like Kubiak is Sean McVay, man. Like, we don't know that he's going to be that level of a razor for your team. Also, too, I get that he could maybe make the offensive line and run game better, but if they're going from 29th in those to 24th, like, is that really enough to move the needle here? And then also now your pass catchers are just worse. Like, and the quarterback is worse. Like, it feels like a lot of selling yourself on this idea that almost every piece of it has no proof of concept, really.
Yeah, I can totally understand the need that they felt to break the wheel of mediocrity, right? That they were kind of on, even if it was a fun era of Seahawks football with Tyler Lockett and DK Metcalf and JSN and Geno Smith and all these guys. Like, I think it was really fun. Those guys were awesome to like watch play offensive football, but they weren't exactly winning games, and sometimes you just got to break it. But I think what they've then pieced together with the broken pieces is not all that interesting. So that's why it's just a weird offseason at the very least, even if I could kind of understand where they were coming at it from. To stay on the Geno Smith stuff, I wouldn't totally rule out the Raiders taking a young quarterback at some point. It's on my radar, Derrik, that they traded for Geno Smith because his contract situation fell apart with the Seahawks, or he wanted more money from them. As soon as they trade for Geno, like, oh, they're going to make, the reports are he's going to get an extension. He's their quarterback of the future. March 25th, and I don't think we've seen any reports since then about what his contract is going to look like with this Raiders team. So he might be a short-term bridge, and they could certainly look at a quarterback at some point in the NFL draft.
They absolutely could. They're a tricky one for me to figure out what they want to do, because I think if you just looked at the roster and like the situation in which Geno Smith has been brought in, it would be like, yeah, this is a perfect spot to take a, third round dart throw, just see what happens. No pun intended, obviously. But I also wonder, like, does Pete Carroll want to do that? Like, does he want to burn a pick on a developmental quarterback when he's, 70 some odd years old and already traded for a quarterback he knows that he loves and is going to be his quarterback one? That is the part of it I find difficult for me to like parse which side of it I fall on and what they might do.
They do have a decent amount of draft picks, so they could certainly take one somewhere. But the problem is they got a lot of needs too. Like, I still think this defense needs a lot of help. They badly need an X receiver at some point here. Like, they have Brock Bowers, who's awesome. They have Jacoby Myers, who's underrated. That's it. Like, the end of list. They also need a running back. Like, they have a lot of needs, and that's just on the offensive side of the football. The secondary is a big problem. They could certainly use more help on the defensive line to go along with Max Crosby. Linebackers an area of need for, like, so yeah, again, we burn a pick on Will Howard or something, and I'm saying that only because, Chip Kelly obviously coached Will Howard last year, and he's the offensive coordinator here. We use a pick on Will Howard. Are we winning any more games than we were? Maybe not, but that could be a problem because, shoot, they need help elsewhere.
Yeah, that's especially with the defense. They lost, like, obviously Wilkins and Crosby are their best players, but outside of that, they lost like 2 or 3 of their best other guys. Like Robert Spillane's out the door, Trevin Merrick's out the door. Like, it just they've got a lot of work to do on outside of the quarterback room.
Final kind of grouping of teams to just consider here. I'll throw a few out, and if you can think of any more, just to at least put it on the people's radar out there. teams that are looking for young backups, maybe teams that have a slight eye towards the future, like again, kind of what the Raiders are doing, but maybe a little bit more. We feel like our starter's going to be here for a minute. Like the Dolphins, the Rams, the Cowboys. I think these are teams that are probably looking for some youth at the backup spot. And maybe like some of these teams could maybe think about an heir apparent. These are the teams that I think will be plucking from the Will Howards, the Kyle McCords, the Quinn Ewers or whatever's of the world here.
I think Dolphins, absolutely. And a lot of this for me is obviously rooted in the fact, well, one, when Tua Tagovailoa is your quarterback, just with some of the injury stuff, you probably do need to take care of the backup quarterback spot. And we've seen how bad this could be for them when they weren't doing that, when they were having to sign Tyler Huntley off the street and stuff like that. And then the other thing is I just don't know if Tagovailoa is really a long-term caliber starting quarterback in my opinion. And so they would be a team that if they wanted to go take Dart, and he fits what, kind of what I talked about earlier with just being the Jimmy Garoppolo bot, throw it over the middle.
Oh, yeah.
He could actually make sense for them. So them I totally get. And then the Cowboys, obviously new coaching staff. I love Dak, and I don't think any rookie they bring in would immediately contend with Dak. But if they wanted to try to mold a guy for 2-3 years, Dak gets a little bit older, maybe they can get out of his contract by that point. It's okay, that makes total sense. And also they let Cooper Rush out of the building, who Cooper Rush is actually a pretty good backup, so you kind of need to replenish that spot. The Rams are a trickier one to me. I almost wonder if they are just so, at this point, locked into Blaze of Glory with the Matt Stafford era. We're not burning a second or third round pick on any of these other quarterbacks. I don't even know if Sean McVay wants to do that with a young quarterback anyway, develop one. I think they're just going to be we'll draft another receiver in the second round, man. Whatever, just full go.
I'm with you on the Rams, even though that's probably the final legacy checkbox that, Sean McVay needs. We had the career rehabilitate. He rehabbed Jared Goff. He elevated a veteran quarterback to an area where he'd never been before in Matthew Stafford. The third infinity stone is draft a young quarterback in the first round or, whatever. Draft a young quarterback and that's my guy. And then he can piece out to, make $30 million a year doing either broadcasting or having his own YouTube channel or whatever.
That's a great point. I didn't realize that this is it's getting all the 100%ing a video game. This is for quarterback development. This is his last one. He's got to take a quarterback in the first round and really see if he can make somebody something special. Yeah,
and as for the Cowboys, they obviously they let Cooper Rush go, which is. Man, talk about a whiplash. If, knock on wood, Lamar Jackson ever misses time, that offense is going to go from Lamar Jackson to Cooper Rush. I like Cooper Rush as backup quarterback, but talking about two pretty different approaches to playing the game. So that will be interesting. But so again, Dallas needs a backup. They also need a backup that half the fan base can overrate because they hate Dak Prescott secretly. That they need that in Dallas, so that's a need to check off. And yeah, the Dolphins, man. The only thing I agree with you that somebody like Jackson Dart would make sense here, just point and shoot. I just wonder how long ownership is committed to this vision of the team, and you just you brought Zach Wilson into the building to try to do whatever with Zach Wilson. But are you burning a quarterback pick on a system that might not be around for that much longer?
That's a really good point, honestly, because if this year doesn't go well, and they're very committed financially to this year working out well, all these guys are probably out of the building. So that's a good point. Why would you burn a developmental pick on when you're not 100% sure that your coaching staff is going to see it through to the end? That's a really good point.
Yeah, the only other team maybe I'd throw out is the Jets with Justin Fields. Obviously, they're not committed to him long term. But I will just say, and we can close on this, Derrik, none of these dudes scream high upside dart throw to me anyways. Unless it's Milroe, and I think you really have to stretch into the Jalen Hurts comp, the kind of unfair Jalen Hurts comp that he gets to really see the upside path with him. That's why I think a lot of these teams that maybe could use a young upside backup or something like that, I think they ultimately end up passing.
Yeah, I struggle to get there with most of these guys. Riley Leonard, you could maybe sell me on he's a really good athlete and he's accurate. Jalen Milroe has the physical tools, but the difference to me between him and Jalen Hurts is even for some of the holes in Jalen Hurts' game coming out of college, one, he was a really consistent player. Game to game, down to down, even with some of his issues, you knew what you were getting going into a game. With Milroe, that is not the case. You can get him absolutely frying Georgia and then just falling apart against considerably lesser defenses. And the other difference is like Hurts was really accurate to all three levels of the field, like touch accuracy too. I mean, like some of the corners that he throws, even to this day, are some of the best in the league. Jalen Milroe is he's throwing missiles, for better or for worse. It's 100 miles an hour, and so that to me like draws his ceiling down a little bit.
Yeah, I said this. That's a great point about like the Jalen Hurts and just the touch he can put and like on go routes to AJ Brown and stuff like that. I said this with Charles on the quarterback preview last week. This ended up being a fantastic waste of time charting Jermaine Burton for reception perception last year. And like Jermaine Burton let it be known that that was a waste of time very early into his NFL career. But that was my first experience with Jalen Milroe. And yeah, it's just like he just has the rocket launcher from Halo and he's just like firing that thing out of there. And like there's no touch, there's no placement. And Hurts, I think, he gets really underrated in that regard. So yeah, like you can't really get me too excited. You can't sell me on this. That might be the theme of the 2025 NFL quarterback class. So I think that's a great way to end it. Derrik, I appreciate you doing this with me, buddy. This was a great way to kick this series off. Tell the people out there what you're working on leading into the NFL draft that they can check out.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me. This was it's always a good time. As far as stuff I've got going, I mean, we're doing podcasts, I think 4 days out of the week over at The Athletic. I will be on most of them, but we're going to have Dane on, Dane Brugler, every week to kind of go through our position by position rankings and discussions and all that. And then we've got a couple more like uniquely framed shows in terms of just diving into particular positions and how we view them in the draft and all that sort of stuff. So we've got a lot of good stuff on the podcast feed. So
yeah, you and Robert are I consider you guys friends in the industry, so I say this lovingly, but you psychos had like a 5-7 hour live show for free agency that I was invited on. I was a part of, and that was great to do it. You guys are cranking. Clearly, I say that, but to say you guys are cranking out audio YouTube content, so everybody should make sure they're subscribed to the Athletic Football Show to check all of that out. That is going to do it for today's show. Mercifully, we are not doing 4 podcasts a week. However, on Thursday, we are going to be back. We're going to continue our draft deep dive series with Charles McDonald with part 1 of the running back class. Yeah, we're doing 2 running back shows this year because it's that good of a class. We're going to double dip at that position. Until then, we are out.